Yeah, live.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session of LitFestx. We are joined with none other than Mr. Edward Lucas, who's a prominent British journalist. He works for The Economist magazine, and he was earlier the Moscow bureau chief from 98 to 2002, and thereafter the Central and East European correspondent. He has also in the past been a correspondent for The Independent and the BBC. Lucas also writes occasionally for the Daily Mail. Edward is also the senior fellow and contributing editor at the Center for European Policy Analysis in Washington, D.C. Edward, welcome to LitFestx. I'm based in Mumbai. You're clearly in London, and this session is being broadcast live as we speak.
Well, thanks very much indeed for inviting me, and congratulations to you and the organisers on this wonderful idea of having a virtual literary festival. I'm only sorry I can't be in Mumbai in person, but it's great to be with you electronically.
Thank you, Edward. You know, Edward, your new book is very interesting, and I think when we spoke about the title of this session, it was at both scary as well as intriguing, in terms of the kind of things that are lurking in the cyberspace, if you will, and the kind of threats and weaknesses which are in the system overall. Tell us a little bit about your view in general when we are saying that are we really going to be possibly in a very anonymous and anarchic online world?
Well, I think that the assumptions that we've made and the decisions that we've made over the last 20 or 30 years have all prioritized convenience and innovation over security. And at every stage as the internet's developed, we've always said, hang on, let's not have too much regulation, let's not be too worried about security, because the main thing is to get all this stuff working. We need e-commerce, we need e-banking, we need email, we love the idea of hooking up different devices and services so they can talk to each other. And it's been a very exciting and very productive era. And it's brought us tremendous benefits. The fact that someone, the poorest people in the world can get a smartphone for a small amount of money and buy access to the internet, and they have the same access to data as someone who's very wealthy and lives in the developed world. So the internet's been a great democratizer, and it's had huge benefits. Excuse me. But we do have, as a result of all these assumptions and decisions, we've built up a huge problem with security. The internet was not designed to be secure. It was designed on the basis of goodwill and cooperation as a means for academic cooperation, and designed to be very resilient as well. Those are great things. But we don't really have an answer to the basic questions of identity and trust. And if you think about it, our civilization is based on the idea that we can have productive and trusting interactions with people we don't know. So I go out in my front door in the morning, and if I get into a car, I know that that car is driving on roads where the other drivers have been insured and licensed, and if anything goes wrong, I have some sort of redress. And this is just not the case on the internet. We are faced with people who we don't know and who we can identify only with difficulty, and they can't identify us either. We don't have the ability to prove who we are. And the result of this is that we are constantly tripping up in our dealings with other people. We get fraud, we are being, people are stealing and borrowing our identity and perpetrating things in our names. When we navigate on the internet, we don't know where we're going to. We think we've arrived on the website of a bank or somewhere, and we type in our details, but actually maybe those details are being stolen. So we're in a far more anarchic and difficult world than we realize, and I think things are getting worse rather than better.
And you mentioned in the past some very stark examples from recent times, especially in Britain and some other parts of the world, where newer kinds of threats have emerged and actually, incidents have taken place. Are there some broad areas that you would categorize these kind of threats and issues in?
Yes, I think it helps to remember that there is no such thing as cybercrime. All these attacks we see have real perpetrators and real victims. The beneficiary is someone, whether it's a spy or hooligan or criminal or prankster, but someone is behind this. Computers just don't attack us at random. And there's a real victim, there's a real person, a real business. Someone is suffering at the end, either with a breach of privacy or the loss of their money, or because their country has been made weak or defeated from a state-to-state attack. So I think it's a good idea to get away from the idea that the important thing about this is cyber. The important thing about this is the attack. And we need to not get too blinded by the technical details and keep thinking about the politics and sociology and anthropology and economics and all these other things which help us to understand what's going on.
So, one of the issues I believe prevents systematic efforts to tackle cybercrime, or crime related to online data hacking, so on and so forth, is the lack of a strong, effective, common regulatory body which can oversee it at a global as well as then impact at a ground level in local countries or local areas. What has been your experience, research, and views on this?
Well, I don't think we're ever going to get a strong international regulatory body that runs the internet. The internet isn't like that. And if you think about other sort of international border crossing things like aviation and maritime traffic, we don't have a sort of global ministry of the Navy that organizes all our shipping everywhere. We don't have a global aviation authority. We have a whole range of different authorities with different competencies. So you have some things that end up with the UN. Some things are more to do with civil law, that you can sue a ship owner if he does something bad. And there are different sorts of liabilities that you may get into if you're a ship owner and you do something bad, and different ways people may sue you. We also have criminal liability. You can be prosecuted under the laws of national jurisdictions if you do something wrong. There's also the insurance question. You can't put to sea with insurance if you run an old rust bucket. The insurance companies won't like that. Then there's customer pressure, supplier pressure, pressure from employees. All those have a role in keeping people raising standards. And then there's also social pressure, just what sociologists would call normative pressure. People don't do things because they're bad things to do, and we don't want to be bad people. So I think all these things have got to be brought to bear on the internet. So just as it would be irresponsible to go to drive when drunk, or to take a car onto the road that has bad tires and bad brakes and cracked windscreen and doesn't steer properly and so on. So we should have strong social sanctions and other legal sanctions against people who take computers onto the information superhighway, which are full of malware, polluting the internet for everybody else, being accessories to crimes, endangering our kind of public hygiene on the internet. So I think that's the way to look at it, but I don't think there's a single big bang solution. That would be, I think, is both undesirable and unworkable. And
in terms of the technology then available, so do you see that cyber criminals, or let's say perpetrators of any of these attacks, whether for hooliganism or whether for financial gain or whether for access to data, by spies, do you see the defenders having to constantly, lag behind the perpetrators of such attacks, or are you seeing proactive efforts where people are able to develop tools and technologies to thwart such attempts?
Well, I think it's both. I think that states are able to do things that nobody else can do. A state can put you in prison, and that's a really big sanction. And we've seen in particularly the United States, but also in other countries, Kim.com, for example, in New Zealand, who was a big internet pirate. In the end, you may be as online and digital and virtual as you like, but in the end, real life policemen come to your door and they put real life handcuffs on you, and you go into a real life jail where you may not even, horror of horrors, be able to go on the internet. So that's a sanction, that's a sort of ultimate sanction that states have got. There's also, in warfare, there's the kinetic response, which means that if you attack the United States with a logic bomb or some kind of digital weapon, you may end up with a missile coming in through your window and killing you. And the United States has made it very clear that it reserves the right to have kinetic responses to digital attacks, and other countries will do the same. So those are two important things. I think for ordinary people, ordinary businesses, ordinary organizations, there's enough cybersecurity information out there that you can do things that make you pretty safe. You'll never be absolutely safe, just as in the real world, you'll be never absolutely safe. But there's enough straightforward things you can do that make you no longer an obvious target for attackers. Now, are those things easy? No, they're not. It requires money, self-discipline, energy. You sacrifice some convenience and some time, but you can make yourself safe. You can have strong digital authentication, so you know who you're dealing with. You can have you can encrypt your data and encrypt it properly, so even if someone breaks in, they can't steal. It won't do them any good. You can design your network so you assume it will be breached, but you have defense in depth, so that the attacker spends so much time getting over the different hurdles you put in his way that you have a pretty good chance of spotting him, seeing what he's up to, and so on and so forth. So that there are a lot of tools out there, but most people, I'm afraid, for the most part, still want their internet to be cheap, and they want it to be convenient, they want it to be innovative, and they assume that security is somebody else's problem.
Right. So what you're really saying is that by and large, the general public and even large corporations haven't really taken security as seriously and as something which they need to be more concerned about than anybody else. They haven't really woken up to that in a major way.
Absolutely. That's absolutely. If you said to the chief executive of a company, your factory is secured with a child's padlock, I can pick it with a hairpin, and when I go in, all your most important commercial secrets and all the details of your customers are just lying around on desks. I can photograph the lot and walk out again and nobody will catch me. They would say, that's appalling. And if that was happening, I would resign as chief executive. The shareholders would be right to sack me. The police should probably prosecute me for carelessness. People would be really horrified at just at an office where you didn't lock the doors properly when you went home at night. People understand that this is important. Yet in the digital world, it's all a bit too complicated. And I think there's also, at the risk of sounding ageist, there's a bit of a generational problem. There are a lot of people who running companies who are not digital natives, and they don't really understand network architecture. They don't really understand information assurance. They don't understand how easy it is to do social engineering and get somebody's password. And so they're not perhaps the right people to be running their organization's digital security.
True. There's something you had interestingly mentioned at the outset in terms of the kind of attacks and threats that lurk out there. In recent memory, which were one or two of the big incidents which have caught your attention?
Well, one of the ones I write about is the attack on Sony Pictures, which some of the viewers may remember. And this was an attack where we still don't really know who perpetrated it, but it seemed to be connected to the fact that they were producing a not very funny film about the North Korean dictator. And this was a trivial film, but the attack was not anything but trivial. The attackers broke in, they got the emails that the executives had sent to each other, which included very derogatory remarks about some very important film stars. They included some pictures that Sony hadn't released yet, so that was a theft of if you like, of commercial property. And they got lots of private details of the company's employees. And it was a really very serious attack. Now, Sony Pictures is still in business. It didn't destroy them. There have been other examples of companies that have actually gone out of business as a result of being attacked. But I particularly like this one because of the breadth of the stuff that was taken and the fact that we still don't really know who was responsible. Was it a disgruntled employee? Was it the North Korean Secret Service? Was it somebody else pretending to be the North Korean Secret Service? We still don't really know. The attribution is really difficult in cyber attacks. It takes you a long time to know that you've been attacked. The average time that the intruders are on a network is 210 days. So that's 8 months before you notice you've been attacked. And once you do notice you've been attacked, you don't really know what's been taken and you don't really know who did it. So if you put that in the real world, that would be a really startling, alarming thing to be happening to us. And I think we should be equally alarmed about the fact that it's happening to our computers and networks.
And that indeed is a very scary proposition from what you say. If it takes over 200 days for one to even realize and find out that their network has been attacked, means entire business cycles, entire production cycles for corporations, sales cycles, all of it could get affected without them getting to know about it till it is too late.
Yes, absolutely. And you have to remember attackers can be after a very wide range of things. So they may be just wanting to know information that will help them with insider trading, for example. If they can just read the emails about future announcements of profits or losses or new upcoming deals, that they can then tell that this will send the share price either up or down, and they can be very happily just making money on the stock exchange on the other side of the world, and no one will connect those trades in Mumbai, for example, to the fact that information was stolen in New York, or vice versa, the fact that information was stolen in Mumbai and the trades are made in New York. So that's one kind of attack. Or it may be stealing commercial secrets in terms of designs and products and blueprints. We saw a lot of that with Chinese companies which have stolen Western products, and we've then seen the same products being produced in China, sometimes with the same mistakes that the Western companies had in their hardware or software. So they didn't just copy the good ideas, they copied the entire thing. And you see this, some router or something being produced by a Chinese company, and it's word for word, including the mistakes in the software, is the same as what was stolen. So that's a very big disadvantage. And then, of course, there's the whole business of extortion, that you say to a company, we've encrypted all your data and you're not going to get it back unless you pay us a ransom. This is another so-called ransomware. So there's a very, very wide range of attacks, and I don't like the word cyber because it tries to pull them all together under one roof. It is everything from blackmail and extortion through to theft, insider trading, all sorts of other, any crime you find in the real world, you'll find its equivalent in the online world.
And Edward, in your experience now, are you seeing regulators at the state level and let's say forensic investigators being able to then do a post facto evaluation in a in-depth manner, or do you think it is still lacking?
Well, it depends very much who the investigator is. That if you're talking about the high-end intelligence service of a serious country, so GCHQ in Britain, or the National Grid in India, or the NSA in the United States, they will pretty much get everywhere they want to get. And if their country's attacked, they will find it they have very sophisticated means to find out who's behind the attacker, because of course they can combine the human and the electronic. The typical attacker that you or I may face is someone who, at most they may make some phone calls. They may phone you up and say, I'm doing a survey, what's the name of your first pet? And then you tell them, and then they can use that little bit of social engineering to get into your bank account, where one of the security questions is name of first pet. That's a very simple sort of attack. But they're not going to be able to break into your house, go through your papers, put a pinhole camera on the wall behind you, do all this sort of thing. And a high-end state agency can do all that. They use as much human and as much electronic intelligence as they need to crack whatever the target is. And they will do that with attribution as well. So they will use human espionage to try and find out who's behind an attack, and they're quite good at that. If you're a company, that's much more difficult. You see the data disappeared, it went as it were, down the plug hole. It disappeared in the internet to a server that is maybe not a real server, not a proper address. You don't know where it went after that. The attack came from a quarter where you can be quite sure that wasn't the real. Maybe I was talking to one person, and the source of an attack was a computer belonging to the agriculture ministry in quite a well-known country. Now, it's a fair bet that the agriculture ministry wasn't actually doing the attack. They just had secured their computers badly, and so it was being used as the base for the attack. And then if you go and do the forensics on that computer, you get into all sorts of blind alleys and disguises have been put in there. And by the time you end up on where you think the end is, it turns out that the attackers have long since moved and the trail's gone cold. So it's really difficult for a private sector or an ordinary person to work out who's doing the attack, and you just have to use guesswork really and think, what have I got that someone might want to steal, and well, who are the people who might want to steal that, and then you can start working it out that way. But you won't have much electronic proof.
So you bring me to a very interesting question then, that if the range of responses is so wide, in terms of depending on who the perpetrator is and who the victim is, what about for example the insurance industry's response to this? I mean, typically in a physical insurance case, the insurance company would need to be able to establish and verify whether certain checks and balances as appropriate were already in place or not before they can go ahead and process a claim. But in this sort of a scenario, what have you seen happening as far as the insurance recovery and the process goes?
Well, I think insurance companies are rapidly trying to get to grips with this, but it's very difficult, because if you're insuring a building, you say, do you have sprinklers? Do you have fire extinguishers? Do you have locks on the doors and windows? I mean, we pretty much know what good practice looks like on a building. At the end of that, you then say, right, you're now insured. Now, if the person who owns the building has a central heating system and it's hooked up to the internet, and someone hacks that central heating system and makes the boiler run way too hot, the boiler catches fire, and then the building burns down, well, that's a whole new frontier for the insurance company. They have to then say, do they say you're not allowed to have anything hooked up to the internet? Well, actually, these days it's getting very difficult not to hook things up to the internet. There's all sorts of things that we need to have hooked up to the internet. So then they're in the business of saying, well, have you got the right firmware on this? Is it updated? What's the remote monitoring? What are the backups? How do who has the passwords? What's your security like? And these are all new questions for security, for internet, for insurance companies, and they are not at the moment very good at doing that. But they're going to need to get good at doing that, because people are trying to buy this insurance, and bad real-world things are happening. Cars crashing because someone's hacked into the software on the car. Well, the insurance company is going to have to pay for that, so they've got to get to learn how to deal with this sooner rather than later.
That's very true, very true. We are now coming to the end of the session, and I wanted to take your view, in terms of where do you see all these forces, coming together, and where do you think we are headed? I mean, is it all very pessimistic, or are you more optimistic that the general public and corporations and governments will be able to catch up more? What's your sort of, if we can get a prophecy or a vision of the future from you?
Well, I think it's going to get worse before it gets better, because there's so much baked into the way we live now in terms of bad people running old computers with old software, people who don't understand about how to patch it and update it, and who don't understand responsible behavior. So we've got a great big dead weight of the of all the carelessness and complacency of the past. So that's a problem. I think we are beginning to develop safe spaces on the internet, and these will become islands of good behavior and safety, which will begin to get bigger. And one thing I mentioned in the book is that you can now get a strong digital ID. you can apply as the country of Estonia, the small Baltic Republic of Estonia, has the best, to my mind, digital ID system in the world. And they've made that available to foreigners. So you in Mumbai can go to the Estonian consulate, pay €50, you do a biometric check, show your real world ID, and you then have a really strong digital identity with which you and I can email each other, and we can know that that is coming from you to me. I can send you a document that only you can read, and you know that document came from me. Now, this is already great for the small number of people who have it, but I think this is going to mushroom. It won't just be Estonia. Singapore is rolling out a similar scheme. The Japanese are very interested. So I think within 2 or 3 years, a lot of people are going to have something in their pocket which gives them the ability to prove who they are on the internet, and then they're going to start expecting that other people should be able to prove who they are as well. And that will create, as it were, cars with license plates driving around on the roads, and we're going to start having roads where only cars with license plates can go, and we push the kind of the Wild West internet will be pushed a little bit more towards the margins. And I think as people decide that safety matters, these safe spaces with tough rules and high standards will start getting bigger and bigger. And if you want to go into the Wild West, you'll be going as a matter of choice, and you will go there knowing what the risks are. So I think that's the way we're headed, but I still see a lot of quite serious difficulties ahead.
Right, right. So certainly there's a lot for people to be afraid of, and at the same time then prepare for, you know, both as individuals and organizations, big and small.
Absolutely.
And you know, just out of a fun element, you know, since we are a virtual literature festival, we do realize we've got this opportunity of being inside your study room live on YouTube, and I'm seeing a nice big library, you know, a big shelf of books behind you. Do you want to, you know, just give us a sneak peek of what's going on there?
Yes, those are indeed real books, although it's also possible to have a background which just makes you look as though you're sitting in front of a bookshelf, or indeed Niagara Falls. I could even start with a little bit of typing on this keyboard. I think I could actually put a Mumbai skyline behind me, and you'd be very puzzled about why I seem to be in Mumbai. Those are actually my wife's books, and you can see there a whole load of, there's a lot of reference books there, and a lot of novels, and just trying to see what else, a lot of history books, a huge dictionary. But we have thousands and thousands of books in our house, and we're always looking for more bookshelves, because we have piles on the floor as well. And this is, I think, an interesting example of how we get things wrong on the internet, that people assumed that the Kindle and ebook readers would put the book publishing business out of business. And indeed it did dip quite sharply, but actually there are more books being published than ever before, and I think that the old-fashioned book still has a lot of life left in it. People like them, and this our sitting room, I think, shows why.
Certainly. Well, thank you so much, Edward, and real pleasure having you with us, and some good insights and, you know, good words of advice as well from you. And we wish your latest book all the success, and may it continue to, you know, do really well, both in print and in digital. And we look forward to being in touch with you.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It was a real pleasure. My first electronic literary festival, but I'm sure not my last. Thank you very much indeed. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.